Well, what a pleasure it is. Ian Anderson, welcome to the Tomano and Tui radio show.
Well, thanks very much. Nice to see you.
It's good to have you back in town. Well, you are hearing us, and it's great to hear your voice. You do a lot of touring around the whole world, and it's got to be nice to come back to the Rialto Square Theater in Joliet.
Well, it's nice to come back to anywhere. At my age, you kind of you think with a sense of relief you've managed to make it round again. And of course, a lot of musicians of my era, my peers, are no longer with us, and so we're often reminded of the fact that we are lucky, those of us still doing it, to be treading the boards of any theatre, anywhere, anytime. But yeah, some of the great classic theatres of the USA are a special treat, because I'm a theatre guy. I don't really like playing those kind of sports halls and multi-purpose venues that have been perhaps less sympathetically designed for entertainment than traditional theatres. I enjoy the old-fashioned theatres best.
Yeah, well, and that type of historical theater setting like the Rialto is a perfect place. Steve and I were lucky enough to catch you in Tull a few years back. This is an Ian Anderson solo tour. So when you do a solo tour, Ian, how do you go about selecting the song list from such an illustrious career?
Well, first of all, really, when I do Jethro Tull shows, which I've just kind of finished doing in the middle of September, that we wound up doing Jethro Tull shows. We've been on tour doing Jethro Tull stuff since February of this year, so it was a long haul of various shows in different parts of the world. And then I kind of switched to doing the Ian Anderson stuff. Really gives me a chance to stretch out a little deeper and a little wider into the Jethro Tull back catalogue, and not feel perhaps more restrained regarding choosing only the heavy hitters, the best-known songs from radio play or from Reputation, and the more rock songs. Gives me a chance to go into some of the other stuff, the acoustic songs, the more esoteric pieces over the years, and then obviously to try out a few new songs as well, which we do, and play a couple of songs from the world of classical music, and just generally speaking, it's broader and deeper, but most of it is indeed Jethro Tull catalogue that I play on Ian Anderson tours, because I am the guy that wrote the music, and in many cases I'm the guy who played most of it in the studio. Sometimes there are those songs that really, although it's a Jethro Tull album, I'm kind of the only person on them.
You talk about an Ian Anderson composition, from the Jethro Tull albums to the solo stuff. It's like a good movie or a book. You can return to it as a fan time and time again and hear something new, discover little subtleties that may have not been prevalent before. When you're working away at a tune, layering sound and putting little effects in there and little motifs that come and go, how do you know when a song is done? Like a painting, how do you know when it's time to say, okay, this song is finished?
Well, rather like a painting, it's very easy to keep putting paint on the musical canvas and realizing you put too much there. And very often it is, I think, a mark of maturity, really, to recognize that it's done maybe a little earlier than you might have done when you were in your 20s and you felt compelled to keep trying, new things and putting another little touch here and something else there. And so when I look back on some of the music that we played in the early 70s, some of it is a little, I think, too dense. There's too much going on, but it was a density born of enthusiasm, a density born of genuine interest and wonderment at what you could do with music. So I think we all perhaps played into it a little bit too much, and sometimes things would have benefited from letting a little daylight shine through the dense arrangements. But that's something I think you learn as you go on through life. And indeed, when I listen to that genre referred to as prog rock, I listen with ears that sometimes become clogged up relatively early on, whether it's Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or early Genesis or King Crimson, whatever it might be. Sometimes there's just so much going on that it's your ears become fatigued. And I think we made one particular album like that, A Passion Play in '73, which just didn't seem to let up. It was just so dense. And although I play a little excerpt of that on stage during this tour that we're doing right now, it's very rare that we dip into that one. Although we do have some plans afoot to do the whole of Thick as a Brick.
Is that right?
In a couple of years' time.
Now, when you go back to something as vast as Thick as a Brick, do you ever say, "Whew, how do I play this again?" Are there any things that are tricky for you to relearn?
Well, I haven't played all of Thick as a Brick since 1972. We only played it really for a UK tour, some dates in Europe, a few in Australia and Japan, and I think a couple of tours in the USA, but it really just took place in that 1 year, and it was never played in its entirety again, although we've often included some 10-minute excerpt of Thick as a Brick in our shows over the years, but we've never played all of it. So I deliberately went back a few months ago to actually go through the whole thing from top to tail, and just to see how difficult it was, how easy it would be to realize that in other parts of that music and performers today, and all of it is doable, and it's not actually that difficult to learn. I think from my perspective, although I had to sit and kind of figure out now, what was I doing on the guitar? How did I play? How did I physically play that bit?
What is that chord?
It kind of comes back to you in most cases, even with the passing of some 40 years. Somehow it just starts to fall under the fingers again after a few minutes, and you remember how you did it. And some songs come even easier than that. But I have to say there is one chord in one song that I'm playing at the moment on stage, and I really, for the life of me, cannot fathom out how I played it or what I played back when I recorded it in 1971.
So you're trying to sound at least similar.
It's a really tricky, it's just some quirky little thing, and I haven't quite nailed that yet, even after several attempts to try and work it out.
Fans go to JethroTull.com, and there's always something new to discover there about the band. One of the things that I know gnaws away at you from fans is with Keith Richards now doing his autobiography. Will we see the Ian Anderson autobiography anytime soon?
Well, you see, Keith Richards has a very larger-than-life popular history behind him, and whether or not it's all entirely true, we can't really be sure. I mean, Keith Richards, on the couple of occasions I briefly met him, seems a very, quiet, charming, respectful and respectable guy. But, of course, the stories about him, which are fairly legendary, would suggest some kind of really, crazed hellraiser and someone who is right up there in the ultimate rock and roll hierarchy of sex and drugs and scandal and over-the-top behavior. And I guess there's a little truth in everything, and doubtless Keith, in his book, will reveal what he feels it appropriate to reveal. And, the trouble is, in comparison, I just wouldn't have a book. I would have a paragraph, because, in all sincerity, I'm the guy who, I'm probably the only guy, although they say Frank Zappa also was of this ilk, that he actually never took what were popularly termed drugs. I mean, he smoked cigarettes.
Right.
And I don't know whether he enjoyed a glass of Chardonnay or not, but he never took what were popularly termed drugs. And I have this on account from people who were very close to him. And I'm the only other guy I know who never took drugs.
Yeah, you and Ted Nugent.
That straight away, I'm kind of out there in a different world from not only most other musicians, but most other human beings.
Yeah, right.
And consequently, I don't really have those kind of wild, hell-racing sex, drugs, and rock and roll stories. And when we were on tours and opening out for Led Zeppelin back in '69, we were aware they were a pretty hard partying bunch of guys, and in a way we were kind of fascinated about it. But ultimately, when the option came up to go to a Zeppelin after-show party and join in the fun and frolics, or to retire early with a good book in front of Dick Cavett or Joey Bishop, then I'm afraid the latter won. And I tended to be someone who then and now likes to be in bed by 11 p.m. if at all possible, because I usually wake up early in the morning, and so I like my early mornings rather more than staying up all night, which I just can't do, never could do.
That never was your thing. Well, the band doesn't seem like that. It never seemed like a heavy metal party all night band. Your music was much too complex to perform high. And you talk about bands who or musicians who didn't do drugs: Frank Zappa, Ian Anderson, Ted Nugent, and you and Ted are still out on the road doing it and still creating music. Have you ever met Ted Nugent?
I've spoken to him on the phone on some radio show, but no, I've come across Ted Nugent sort of just on that periphery of not quite. I think we were once on some kind of weird, wacky festival together, but at different times of the day, and we didn't cross paths. But Ted Nugent being I suppose, an archetype of middle America, sort of comes across as kind of ultra-conservative, hunting, shooting, fishing kind of man's man. He would, I guess he'd be the nice guy in the movie Deliverance, kind of a scary sounding character. But you see, my own background being, living in the country as I do, and being not an ultra-conservative, but someone who's over the years done a fair amount of hunting and shooting and fishing and so on. I guess we'd probably have a lot of things in common, but it's he I guess has cultivated the kind of wild man image, and you have this. I have this feeling if I was to bump into Ted Nugent, I'd have to be very careful to make sure that I announced who I was before getting into any other kind of conversation, because it might be that politically or socially we might have some violently opposed views.
There you go.
But who knows? Maybe he'd let me hold his crossbow.
There you go. Well,